My wife's new boyfriend mocked me at dinner, and everyone laughed. My sister told me to stop making the family look bad, so I let them mock me until he mentioned his job. Then I pulled out my phone and watched their smiles fade. My wife's new boyfriend mocked me at dinner, and everyone laughed. That was the moment the room tilted. Not loudly, quietly, like a chandelier swaying before it falls. The table was set with polished cutlery and forced smiles. Wine glasses chimed. My sister sat across from me, lips tight, eyes warning me not to react. When I didn't laugh along, she leaned in and whispered, "Stop making the family look bad, like dignity was a stain I'd brought with me." He kept going. Jokes dressed as confidence, little digs wrapped in charm. Each punchline landed because the room wanted it to. I stared at my plate, tracing a crack in the porcelain, letting them believe I was shrinking. Then he mentioned his job, casually, proudly, the way people do when they think the ground beneath them is solid. That's when I reached into my pocket. Not angry, calm, and felt the weight of my phone. I wasn't always the quiet one at the table. Before the divorce, before the explanations everyone pretended to understand, I had a voice people listened to. I built things. I solved problems. I paid my share without asking for applause. But somewhere between lawyers and polite family dinners, I became the awkward chapter everyone wanted to skip. My sister decided I was fragile. My parents decided silence was easier than fairness. And my wife, now ex-wife, decided I was a stepping stone she no longer needed. They spoke around me, not to me, as if I were furniture that had sentimental value but no function. It wasn't new. At holidays, I was the one asked to be flexible. At gatherings, the one whose achievements were summarized in half a sentence if mentioned at all. When something went wrong, I was dependable. When something went right, I was invisible. What they never noticed was that I listened. I remembered details. I understood systems, how reputations are built, how careers are protected, how one overlooked fact can quietly change the balance of a room. So when they laughed at me that night, it didn't feel sharp. It felt familiar, like a pattern repeating itself. And patterns, once seen clearly, are easy to break. The jokes didn't stop. They never do once people sense permission. He leaned back in his chair, confidence loose in his shoulders, and asked if I was still between opportunities. The word still hung in the air longer than the question. A few people chuckled. Someone cleared their throat and reached for more wine. No one corrected him. My ex smiled the way she used to when she wanted approval, not truth. She didn't look at me. She watched the table, measuring reactions. My sister gave me that look again, the one that said, "Don't ruin this," as if my silence were a favor she expected me to keep paying. Every comment came wrapped in politeness, a pause before laughter, a sideways glance to see if it was safe. I nodded once, slowly, letting them think they were accurate in their assumptions, letting him believe he was winning something. He talked about ambition like it was a personality trait, about success like it was proof of character. Each sentence landed with practiced ease, and each one carved a smaller space for me at the table. I noticed the details they missed, the tightening grip on his glass when someone disagreed, the way he rushed certain explanations, the rehearsed calm. People who perform confidence usually need it the most. I said nothing. Silence makes people careless. The moment didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with clarity. He mentioned his job again, this time louder, shaping the room around it. A senior role, a respected firm. He said the company name like it was armor, like no one at the table could touch him now. Heads nodded. My ex finally looked at me just briefly, checking if that had done the job. Something settled in my chest. Not revenge, precision. I realized they weren't laughing because he was clever. They were laughing because they believed the story he was telling about me, unemployed, bitter, left behind. And I understood with calm certainty that if I didn't correct the story, it would become permanent. I had worked with his firm years ago, quietly, as a consultant brought in when projects failed and no one wanted their name attached. I knew how reputations there were built, how quickly they could unravel when the wrong email surfaced. When compliance questions were asked by the right people, I didn't interrupt him. I waited until his sentence ended, until the laughter softened into silence. Then I took out my phone. No theatrics, no raised voice, just a screen lighting up in my hand. I said his company's name once carefully, and watched his expression change, just slightly, but enough. That was when I knew I had already won. I didn't act on impulse. I never do. What I did next was something I'd rehearsed for years without knowing it. While the conversation stumbled forward, I unlocked my phone and scrolled, not searching, just confirming. Old contracts, archived emails, a non-disclosure clause I had negotiated myself, a consulting report stamped with dates. signatures, and his firm's internal review code. I hadn't worked for his company, I'd worked around it, cleaning up mistakes they preferred to forget. This was my world: compliance, risk, quiet accountability, the part of business that doesn't make speeches but decides outcomes. I knew exactly which details mattered and which ones didn't. I also knew how to speak without accusing, how to ask questions that force answers. I didn't plan to embarrass him publicly. That would have been loud and temporary. What I planned was accuracy. I waited for a natural pause, the kind that follows someone bragging too long. Then I leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal interest. I mentioned a project by name, one he'd never expect me to know. I asked how the internal review had resolved. No one else caught it, but he did. His smile froze, not vanished, just delayed. His fingers tightened around his glass. He answered too quickly, skipping a detail that couldn't be skipped. That told me everything. I nodded once, like a professional acknowledging a shared past. No threats, no exposure, just recognition. Silent revenge doesn't destroy people. It lets them realize on their own who they've been laughing at. The room didn't explode. It contracted. I asked one more question, soft, almost curious, about a compliance memo tied to that same project. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even look at him directly. I spoke to the table, like I was remembering something mildly interesting. He stopped breathing for half a second. Not enough for anyone to notice. Enough for me to see it. He laughed, tried to smooth it over, said he wasn't involved at that level. That was the mistake. I nodded again and mentioned the title he'd used earlier, the one he was proud of, the one that would have put him exactly at that level. The contradiction sat between us, quiet and undeniable. My sister frowned, finally sensing the shift. My ex leaned forward, confused now, her smile gone. Someone asked what we were talking about. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Just work, I said. Old habits. He didn't touch his drink again. He didn't make another joke. When conversation moved on, he stayed still, eyes down, recalculating a story that no longer held. No one laughed at me after that. Not because I demanded respect. Because they felt the ground change and didn't know why. I finished my meal, thanked my parents, and stood to leave. As I passed him, our eyes met. He knew. And that was enough. The fallout wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, the kind that lingers longer than shouting. My ex stared at me across the living room later, trying to mask disbelief with polite conversation. My sister avoided my gaze entirely, shifting in her chair whenever I looked toward her. Even my parents, who had watched the dinner unfold with careful neutrality, hesitated when they complimented me on my calm. Their praise felt muted but real. He retreated into the corners of the conversation, careful not to speak too much, careful not to brag. Every question he tried to answer now came with caution, measured and unsure. He'd been invisible without realizing it, replaced not by loud noise, but by quiet authority. I felt no triumph in humiliation. I felt recognition. For years, I had been underestimated, ignored, treated like someone whose worth could be dismissed. That night, my silence became a form of acknowledgement, of skill, knowledge, and dignity. For anyone watching, it's a reminder that respect isn't won through volume or charm. It's earned through competence, patience, and knowing when to let others reveal their own flaws. Some victories are quiet, but their echoes last far longer than laughter. I left that dinner with no applause, no dramatic confrontation, and no lingering bitterness. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It was a quiet pulse in my chest, steady and undeniable. For years, I had allowed others to define my worth, to measure me by absence, mistakes or misperceptions. That night, I reclaimed it, not with anger, but with calm precision. Walking to my car, I reflected on the pattern I had endured. Being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. I realized it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right, about trusting the patience, knowledge, and restraint I had honed over years. That trust, the one I had in myself, was far more powerful than their laughter or judgment. The future felt lighter. I knew I could face similar situations without losing composure. I could navigate relationships, work, and family gatherings without sacrificing dignity. And if someone tried to mock or belittle me again, I had the quiet assurance that the truth, remembered and applied strategically, always catches up. I don't need them to see me now. They already have, more clearly than they realize. And sometimes, the most devastating revenge is simply letting someone watch you leave, calm, intact, and unstoppable.